Welcome back to another Kerbal Space Program episode. Today we're going to be talking Orbital Rendezvous and Docking. First things first, let's go over to the R&D building. We need to grab a few things. You should have plenty of science left over. It's mostly this specialized control tab right here. We need the fly-by-wire unit. That thing basically turns a 1-star Kerbal into a 5-star Kerbal and gives you all of the auto SAS options available. We're also going to grab the 2 top heavier rocketry trees up here so we can unlock a couple of bigger rockets so we can get ready to do our minmus Apollo style mission after we go through the docking. We're also going to be grabbing the landing tab as well as the propulsions tab. That way we have better landing legs and smaller fuel tanks. If you already got those landing legs I'm talking about, go ahead and unlock something like space exploration so you can get a ladder. It'll make it a little bit easier. Once we get back from minmus, we'll actually have enough science to go ahead and get the last few things we need to prep for a Duna trip, or at least I'm hoping we do. Either way, we're going to go ahead and get these unlocked, and I'm going to pop over to the VAB, and we're going to build a small little orbital ship that we will strand, quote-unquote, Valentina into space and have Jeb go rescue her. Now, the way to complete this mission is you have to do it over 2 different launches, because it has to be 2 separate vessels. That confused a lot of people. I mean, this mission took me forever. Like, it took me like 4 months to figure this out initially when I played career mode because I didn't quite understand what it meant. I was trying to send like 2 ships up Apollo style and separate them and redock them, but it doesn't work that way. Now, you can try to find yourself a mission that's, scientific data around Kerbin or whatever to get yourself some more funding, but we're doing pretty well, so we're just going to go ahead and get the rocket built. Now, we need to make sure we have a docking port junior on the top of the MK1 control pod, and then we're going to go ahead and throw this service bay underneath the heat shields and the coupler, and we're going to slap on a battery and that fly-by-wire unit inside of it. There's some solar panels on the side of it as well, and we're going to slap that reaction wheel on. And then just real basic rocket, the FT400 tank with the Terrier, followed by 2 FT800 tanks in the swivel, with 2 side mount boosters that are actually going to end up being 1 FT800 tank, and a swivel engine on each side with a fuel line going in between them. This rocket is a bit overkill. You could actually just do it with just that initial 2 FT800 tanks and the single Terrier on the bottom, just like we did in our first orbital flight back in the very first video I actually ever shot for the series. But we're trying to get used to building boosters and getting more used to using them because we'll be using them a lot in the future, so I'm going to go ahead and throw them in here anyways. Now, you could use SRBs to cut the cost a little bit. They're just a little bit harder to work with because of the amount of thrust they put out. It makes it hard to tip in time. But we're just going to go ahead and launch this up real fast and just put her into a orbit around 95,000. We need to make sure we actually have Valentina in the ship, which we almost forgot to do. And then we're going to pretend like her engine failed and go ahead and send Jeb up to rescue her. Now, you could underbuild this as much as you want because we're just going to basically destroy this. We're going to get almost nothing from the ship. I do an EVA report when I'm in orbit, manage to get a little bit of science, and I do bring that back with me. But this entire ship you're seeing right now is going to be blown up, impacting into Kerbin after we rescue Val from it. So same basic descent profile, slowly pitch up about 10K. You want to hit that 90-degree mark and just keep following up until we're at 95 kilometers above the surface instead of 80 because we want to be a little bit farther out. Makes the docking a little bit easier when you're a little bit farther away from the planet because it takes less delta V to make adjustments when you're at a higher orbit. So once we get her into orbit, we're just going to go ahead and pop back down to the KSC and go ahead and build the ship for Jeb. I'm just going to kind of go through this part really fast because we've done, getting in orbit a couple of times now. So hopefully you guys have kind of gotten used to that. If not, I would refer back to my first video, as I said earlier, that talks about getting into orbit the first time, or any video before this because I will be going into more detail with that. Now, I didn't want to use DLC parts when I did this because I know not everyone has DLC, but I also really wanted to show off the command pod, that the Russian replica from the Making History DLC, so we do use that. If you don't have that DLC, then you could actually just stack 2 MK1 command pods on top of each other and just put 2 struts in there, and it's the same exact thing. It's a little taller, but the weight's the same. In fact, it actually has reaction wheels in those MK1 pods, so it makes it a little easier to control. I just really wanted to use one of these Making History DLC command pods, but if you don't have them, you could easily substitute it for 2 of those command pods and just put a couple parachutes on the side and it should be good enough because again the pod we're going to be using weighs almost exactly the same as two of the MK1s stacked on top of each other. The only difference is this pod carries two Kerbals. So now that she's up in orbit, let's go ahead and get this other rocket built, and we're going to start off with that command pod I was talking about. And we're going to throw a typical heat shield under it, and then throw a few parachutes on the side, and make sure you get that docking port junior on the very top. Now, these weren't designed to have parachutes on them. In fact, I'll go into that in just a second, but we kind of want to put that reaction wheel in the battery inside the service bay and throw that fly-by-wire on there as well to kind of give us that extra control. Put a little bit of monopropellant inside of it because the current command part we're using doesn't really have any, and go ahead and slap some RCS tanks on the reaction wheel as well. And then we're going to basically mimic the same thing we did last time, with the only exception is we're going to put a fairing over this piece because those command pods are not very aerodynamic and it makes it a little wobbly flying up. We're also going to add an FT200 tank with a Terrier engine before we do the two FT800s with the swivel, and then again do the two side boosters with the FT800s and the swivel, mostly because the way that fairing's set up, we won't be high enough in the atmosphere to release it properly, so we're just kind of using that to get us a little bit higher in the atmosphere before we get rid of that fairing. That's pretty much all it's there for. It's not required if you want to skip the fairing part of this. Anyways, this is going to be basically the same rocket we just shot up with a little bit more onto it, with a little more Delta V added to it, and that's mostly to give you guys some wiggle room to actually do the orbital rendezvous and some of the adjustments that you need to do. Now, as I said before, that these they're not supposed to have parachutes on them. When these were originally designed in real life, the astronauts were actually, or cosmonauts, I guess, because it was the Russian design, were actually expected to jump out of the capsule after it slowed down to a certain amount of speed and parachute down themselves. Kerbals actually have their own parachute unit now, so you could totally replicate that if you want. Also, don't forget to take out whoever auto adds to that command pod. Typically when you have those, the main command pod have a two-seater, it'll auto fill both seats. We need to make sure there is one seat empty. Now we're going to get ready to launch and go ahead to the map screen and click on Val's ship and set it as a target, just like we would if we were going to the Mun or any other planet to get the encounter. And then we need to time warp to where Val's ship is a bit behind the KSC. Now, you're gonna actually want to launch with it a little closer to the KSC than I do. I just kind of wanted to show you guys what to do if you end up too far in front of your target, because it's really easy to fix. It's actually easier to get a rendezvous if you end up a little bit behind your target, because you can just start to burn at a lower orbit and you match up really fast. In fact, you can usually do it within half an orbit, get a nice, good, close rendezvous. But I'm going to go ahead and kind of show you guys the basics. Once we get up closer to orbit, I'm going to slow this video down so I can kind of walk you guys through this step by step. I've been kind of doing the whole Apollo style rendezvous thing for a couple of years now, so I'm pretty used to it, but I'm kind of treating this as someone who's never actually done this. So there may be some things you do know, and there also may be some things you don't know, or you may just be bored because you know how to do all this already. If that's the case, I'm sorry, but I'm trying to kind of focus on newer players and trying to teach them a couple of skills that help them out for later in the game. Anyways, just like before, we're just going to do our regular descent, get up to about 70-ish meters and start to slowly tip over. We want to hit that 45-degree mark at about 10 kilometers off the surface of Kerbin, and then we're just going to kind of watch the map screen, and you'll see the little blue line will start to slowly come up to the now yellow line since we selected Val's ship as a target. So basically the whole goal here is to get the very top of our orbit before we circularize to match up with Val's. Again, if you are behind the target, you want to actually start your circularization burn just before you get to that line. You'll actually see these two little nodes pop up here in a second that kind of show you where each ship is going to be relative to themselves. Basically, the whole idea of this is to get up into a partial orbit, do the circularization, and then we're going to actually push our orbit a little bit higher than Val so we can slow down. And then we're going to make a correction when we get to the other side of the planet when we're at the higher orbit. And then once we do that correction, we'll actually be able to swing back down, and we'll be getting about where the KSC is now, and we'll have a nice connection with Val. And then we have to do some minor adjustments and stuff, but we'll get into that when we get there. This is about the time I'm going to start slowing the video down. As you see here, we're just kind of doing a normal descent, following that prograde marker. Here in a second, you'll actually see me start coming off of it once I get to the top stage of the rocket, because I'm trying to push my orbit up a little bit faster than need be, because I was trying to make sure that I was definitely going to be pretty far in front a Val ship because I wanted to show you guys how to do a big adjustment. Usually if you launch at the right time, once you kind of figure out where you need to launch, you can almost connect them as soon as you start getting up into orbit. In fact, I've done it a few times. I know a lot of like the higher end YouTube players, like if you ever watch Matt Lown just mess around with his orbital rendezvous, like he can literally get a connection as soon as he like gets up into space. That's something that comes with time and practice. It's not something that you'll be able to do right away. In fact, most of this is going to be practice. This may take you a while to kind of get the hang of, but I do recommend practicing it because orbital rendezvous are a very, very good skill to have in KFSP. They open up a lot of doors. They make doing interplanetary missions a lot easier. Like Eve, for example, you practically have to be able to do this to get to Eve, especially as a console player because the size of the ship you have to build to land on Eve and escape the atmosphere is insane. Like it's way easier to do the typical, I mean, do the Apollo style mission like I'm going to be showing you. Now, I'm going to start talking about random things and get more to the video. You see, I just kind of drug my prograde marker out until my orbit was a little bit higher than Val's. In fact, I'm going to zoom in over here in a second. It's kind of hard to see because the dotted line is really close to the same color as the solid yellow line. But if you look kind of close, you can see that my orbit will be just a little bit above hers. That is because we are in front of her. Now, if she was in front of us, we'd want to do a lower orbit than she is. So just keep in mind, if you are in front of the target, go higher. If you're behind the target, go lower. So let me go ahead and just get to the burn real fast, and then I'm going to kind of show you the part that I believe confuses people. May or may not be right about that. This is kind of the part that I used to get stuck on. That and the fine-tune adjustments. I used to panic at a certain point. When we get there too, I'm going to pretty much just play this video back at normal speed and kind of walk you through it. But once we get our orbit up towards a little bit above Val's, and if you're not sure, you can actually highlight the AP mark on both sides. As long as yours is higher than hers, you're good to go. We're going to make a maneuver at the top of our orbit like I'm doing now, and I'm going to first pull back on retrograde and then bring it prograde, and I'm just going to kind of adjust this back and forth until I get the two little markers close to each other. I'm clicking on it right now. That is kind of our intersect markers. I always aim for the second one because it gives you a little bit more playroom. If you want to try and do it earlier, you can try to get for that first one, but you see there's the two intersects. Basically, that's where your ships will first intersect to where your ships will second intersect. I like to aim at that second intersection. But as you see, I'm just kind of pulling prograde and retrograde back and forth until that number starts getting smaller and smaller. You'll get to a point to where it will get to a certain amount and then it will stop and then it will get wider and farther apart. Once you get to that point, you're pretty much level with the height of the orbit, and now we need to make an inclination change using normal and anti-normal, which are the purple triangles, which you'll see me do here in just a second. Again, I do this back, I'm playing this back at normal speed just so you guys can get a better understanding of what I'm doing. But I'm going to also zoom in here in a second to the intersect nodes. You can actually kind of see it a bit better. I know it's sort of hard to see on the screen, so I'm trying to make this as easy as possible for you guys to see, but I also have to be zoomed out enough to where I can actually grab the maneuver node. On console, once you lock into it, you can actually just use the trigger or bumper buttons to switch in between everything, and it makes it a little bit easier, but on PC, I actually have to use my mouse to drag it up and down. Now you see I'm kind of dragging down on the actually I guess up on the anti-normal, and you see the separation numbers getting smaller and smaller. It will eventually stop. Sometimes you'll get lucky and get a 0.0 encounter. Usually it's between 0.0 and 1 kilometer, and you just kind of want to get it in that area. It doesn't have to be perfect because we still have to do our fine-tune adjustments. Because no matter what, our speed relative to the target won't be exact. And I'm going to be going through that here in just a second. In fact, I overshoot my burn here because I forgot to turn my throttle adjustment down really low. I kind of put it up about a third of the way. You're going to want it a little bit lower than this, especially when you're doing these smaller burns. This first burn is about 20 meters per second, but you're going to see some where we're doing less than 10, and you want to do those as slow as possible. Take it nice and easy, and make sure you don't overshoot like I do here. Now, after we overshoot, I'm going to make another slight adjustment burn to realign our targets. Once we get to that point, I will be burning retrograde to the target. Now, when I say that, if you look at the nav ball, you see how it says target on there and X delta V or X meters a second. That is our speed relative to the target. If it does not say target on your screen, click on that box until it says target. That's very important because if we're not set to target, we won't be burning retrograde to the target, we'll be burning retrograde to the orbit, which we do not want to do. You see here, I'm making another slight maneuver node just to get us a little bit closer. Again, you want to be about 0.0 to 1.0 kilometers separation, because once we get close to the target, we're going to kill off all of our speed burning retrograde to the target, and then we're going to burn towards the target to kind of get our orbits matched up. And you'll see that a little bit more when I get to that. It's actually after I do this next burn, you'll see that I get pretty close to the target and start bleeding off my speed slowly. If for some reason after you do this first bleed off and it's still not quite 0.0, all you have to do is slow your ship back down by burning retrograde to the target, which you should be within a few meters a second, and then point back at the target and just kind of repeat that process until you get the 0.0 encounter. I get it on the first try. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 times of running that back and forth. So just keep that in mind that it might not be exactly as close as mine is. I have, again, been doing this for a few years, and this is going to take a lot of practice. I would also recommend quick saving once you get super close to the 0.0 encounter, just so you don't have to keep going back through all these adjustments. Once you get the general understanding and hang of how to do this, it's really easy. It's just until you understand how the whole rendezvous thing works, it's kind of hard. But if you see here, I'm going about 50-ish meters a second faster than my target. So I'm going to go ahead and burn retrograde to the target once I get close to it. So I'm just going to go ahead and warp up to where I'm somewhat close to the target and just slowly start making puffs to bleed my speed off. I don't want to get it to 0 quite yet. In fact, I want to aim to get it around 5 meters a second. That way we're still heading towards the target, but not too fast. So if you watch, I'm going to kind of zoom in, and you're going to see the encounter nodes start to push away as I start slowing down. The reason for that is we're not going towards the target as fast as we were because we're, again, slowing down relative to the target. That is supposed to happen. You also notice I go from the 0.1 encounter to about 0.7, and then it jumps over to 0.5. That's normal. That's supposed to happen. The first time I had this happen to me, I thought I did something wrong. No, when you slow your speed down relative to the target, it's going to push you a little bit off course, which is fine, because we're going to go ahead and get super close, drop our speed down to 0.0 meters a second relative to the target, and then we're going to burn towards the target. You'll see right here, it's going to start pushing away from me, and you're going to see the separation is going to get a little bit higher, and then I'm going to burn towards the target, and you're going to see that separation come back down to 0.0. That is what you're aiming at, and you want that to be at 0.0 when you're going. I try to aim for 12 to 14 meters a second, but around 20 meters a second, you're usually in the safety zone. Anything higher than that, you'll start pushing away from your target. You're basically just trying to get your relative speed as low as possible while having that 0.0 separation. If you actually look at the tab, it will tell you when you make the encounter how fast or slow relative to the target you will be going. So just kind of watch those little information boxes I keep highlighting there, and they will basically tell you if you're on the right path or not. And you will see this jump back and forth a few times, like mine is doing now. That's fine, that's normal. So after you do this a couple of times, you'll end up coming out of the map screen and you'll actually see your target. And once you get to this point, you just want to very slowly slow down until you're at 0.0 from the target. I hope that makes sense. Now, once you're at 0.0 meters from the target, you're just going to basically float and sink. And I'm going to switch over to the other ship, click on the docking port, and I'm going to pin it. I'm going to hit control from here. I'm going to click on the other docking port, pin it as well, and set it as a target. When I switch over to my other screen, I'm going to select that docking port as target and control from here. What you're doing is basically you're controlling at the docking ports, and you're going to make them face each other by using the aim at target node on the auto SAS. This will basically guide the ships to stay pointed at each other as you're drifting to each other. Now you see the prograde marker is currently in the center of that little pink circle. That's the target marker. You want that to be in there as straight and as lined up as possible, because once that prograde marker starts to drift off, it means you guys aren't coming at each other exactly straight. Sometimes the magnets will be able to kind of work and grab each other when you get close enough, but if you're too far off the prograde marker's too far off of the target marker, you'll usually kind of tap and you'll miss. So you'll see here in a second, I'm going to use the RCS on Jeb's ship to kind of adjust it just to where my program marker is pretty much dead center into the target marker on the nav ball. You need to rely very heavily on the nav ball when you do this, but just slowly float, keep it below 0.05 meters, 0.5 meters a second. Eventually they will connect, and now you are docked. So before I go ahead and get rid of this, I wanted to show you guys something. I just popped the throttle real quick. You need to actually click on the engine on Val's ship and shut it off. If you don't, it will keep burning, and it'll basically make any burns you make counterproductive because you're burning two ships into each other, and it won't work correctly. So turn that off. I'm going to go ahead and get Jeb out so I can see where the access port is on this particular command pod because they're a little confusing. And I'm going to use EVA with Valentina, grab the data out of her command pod from that EVA report we did earlier. And I'm going to get really close to Jeb's pod and I'm going to store the data in that pod. And I'm actually going to do this the cheesy way. I'm going to get back in the ship. I'm going to click on her command pod and hit transfer crew and select Jeb's command pod, and she'll automatically transfer from one pod to the next. Once you do that and both Kerbals are in the ship, we're going to get ready to deorbit this. That way we're not leaving this smaller ship in space and we're able to get the Kerbals back to the ground. At this point, you need to point retrograde and do a quick burn until you're about 30 to 35,000-ish on your periapsis marker. And in fact, you'll see my screen kind of glitch out here for a second. I was trying to take a screenshot and I hit the stop record button and then I hit it back real fast, so you'll kind of see it phase a little bit. That was just me being an idiot with the recording program, and I just didn't want to make it look all choppy, so I just kind of messed with it a little bit. That's the only reason that happened. There's nothing weird or fancy I did there. So we're just going to go ahead and burn prograde, and then once we get within the our periapsis to be within that 30 to 35,000-ish area, we're going to point either directly up or down on the nav ball and undock the ship. The reason you do that is so that ship that you undock isn't going to be either in front of you or behind you, and there's no chance it'll actually crash into you as you're coming back down to the surface of Kerbin. It's not very likely it will happen, but I have been, pointing prograde or whatever and let the ship go, and then I start just getting into the atmosphere and the ship will smack into my ship, and then it knocks everything all out of control, and it's just not a good time. Just point up or down and then eject that ship from your ship by clicking on the docking port and clicking undock. And then pretty much we're going to let gravity and the atmosphere take over. Go ahead and decouple earlier than I did. I was trying to bleed off some speed real fast because we have all this extra delta V. And then I didn't decouple correctly and it got stuck on my command pod and I had to do this kind of flippy maneuver. If this ever happens to you, just kind of point up and down real fast and you should be able to shake off whatever's stuck on your ship. See right here, it gets stuck. So I kind of just swing down and I just flick that engine stage off of my command pod, and then it's going to wobble a little bit because, again, these particular command pods don't have reaction wheels for some reason. And then we're going to pop our parachutes and just slowly fall back down into the waters of Kerbin. And that's pretty much the mission. I'd like to take this time to thank you guys for watching my videos. Go ahead and like and subscribe if you want to see more. I also want to give a special shout out to JRSC Development, aka Craig Stockman. He built some crazy zany things in the enhanced version, so console. So I'm going to link him in the description just in case you guys want to see what console players can actually do, just in case you were worried, because he kind of proves that console players can do really cool stuff just like PC players can do without using mods. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and let you guys go. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. Keep in mind, next time we're going to be doing an Apollo-style mission to Minmus, so practice those orbital rendezvous. If you have any other questions, something I may not have covered good enough, go ahead and ask me in the comments. I'll do my best to answer, and I hope I'll see you guys next time. Until then, have fun, keep trying, don't give up.